In this video, I'm going to talk about the best minimalist shoes for kids. I'm going to talk about the shoes that I've used for my own son. I'm going to talk about some of the drawbacks and some of the advantages of different minimalist shoes for kids. And I'm going to explain some things that you need to think about if you have kids and you're trying to get them into shoes that are more minimal and flexible and wide so that they can have healthy, functional feet. So if you're ready, let's get ready to think right, move right, and feel right. If you're a parent who is trying to find minimalist shoes for your kids, you're probably struggling to find something that makes sense and that's going to work for your little toddler who's going to destroy his or her shoes in a matter of months. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the shoe options that I've chosen for my son and how they held up to the abuse of toddler life. And I'm going to explain some of the trade-offs that we made in order to get the right shoes for the right activities so you can get the most bang for your buck. Because if you're a parent, you've been shopping, you know these shoes are not cheap. I'm curious to know what minimalist shoe solutions you have for your kids, so please drop me a comment down below. It'll help me and other parents out there looking for minimalist shoes for their kids. First, I want to explain why I wanted to put my son in minimalist style shoes and why I didn't want to just stick him into mini versions of adult shoes that look like this. Do these miniature adult shoes look really cool? Do they look super slick? Would my son look amazingly dope in these shoes? The answer is obviously yes. These things look really cool, but I hate how they function. Just like real adult shoes, these soles barely flex, and when I push real hard to get them to flex, they flex in a completely non-anatomical portion of the sole. In addition, the high tops mean his ankle muscles will be totally weak, flabby, and atrophied as he gets older. I'm not a big fan of the idea of my son having weak, crappy ankles as he gets older, so shoes that wrap around his ankle like this and immobilize the joint are just a non-starter for me. And finally, I know my son has wide feet like mine, and narrow toe boxes like these are not going to be good for his new feet. I want his toes to have room to spread and breathe and not just get crunched into a narrow toe box like this. Years of wearing footwear like skates and shoes that were a little bit too narrow left my pinky toes a little bit deformed from being smashed all the time, and I'd rather not do that to my son's feet. Toddler toes and feet that get to work and feel the ground and move around all the time are gonna be healthy and stronger in the long run. Nobody in their right mind would argue that putting a boxing glove on your toddler's hand so that they cannot open their fingers or move their wrist for the first 10 years of their life is a good idea and will give them stronger hands and wrists. It's equally absurd to say we should put a shoe on my child's foot that blocks any motion of their toes and foot and ankle. So now you understand why I want to get minimalist shoes for my child. I want to make sure that the shoes are wide enough for his big fat feet like mine, and I want to make sure that the soles are really flexible and can move and bend and allow him to feel the ground and use all the tiny little muscles in the bottom of his foot. So let's say goodbye to shoes like this. That leaves us with these three pairs of shoes, which are a good illustration of the shoes that we rely on now for my son, who is now 4.5 years old. I'm going to explain the pros and cons and use cases of each of these minimalist shoes for kids, and I'm going to explain how much they cost so that you can understand what you're facing when you're trying to make a good decision for your kids' feet. First, I'm going to start with the most expensive and the dirtiest and the most beat up shoes out of the lineup right now. These are the Soft Star Ramblers, and they are the most expensive shoe, and they are made in the United States in Oregon by American workers who are paid a fair wage. They are $70 for a pair as of filming today, and they are made of actual leather, and they have a rubber sole that's not super thick, but it does provide a little bit of protection. Whenever my son has worn these shoes, I haven't worried about him stepping on sharp rocks or anything like that. There's more than enough padding to protect his foot from normal day-to-day rocks and pebbles and whatnot. They used to have a little bit of tread on them. Now that tread's mostly worn away and is covered with mud. And the reason that there's so much messed up weird stitching on there is because I've had to stitch and restitch the soles back on multiple times because my son used these in a way that totally wrecked them. You may be asking, how did your son wreck the shoes that badly that you had to fix them multiple times? The answer is my son used these shoes while he was riding on wheeled vehicles like a Strider bike or his plasma car. when he is on these wheeled vehicles, he uses his feet as brakes, meaning he has to have shoes on. And if he wants to have shoes on, he likes to have his comfortable shoes on. But these shoes are not good for brakes when you are on a wheeled vehicle, because the way they are made is with stitching that holds the sole to the upper. And that stitching, when it comes in contact with the ground at high speed and constantly, will suddenly wear away. The important thing to note here, though, is that the sole wore away heavily where my son does all of his braking. So I was constantly re-stitching the sole near that big toe side, which he uses as his brake. Everywhere else on the sole was totally fine, and under normal conditions like walking or running or hiking or whatever, there was not really an issue with these shoes. I'm pretty sure these shoes would have held up fine if they were not used as brakes when he was riding his bike or using the plasma car. So on the pro side, my son really liked wearing these shoes, and they worked well for running around, walking around, and doing normal stuff. My son didn't even mind wearing them when there was a gaping hole here when I hadn't had time yet to stitch things back together. So it spoke to just how much he liked these shoes. But these shoes are not good if your kid is going to use them for brakes, because the wear and tear on concrete and asphalt when they're rolling around at high speeds is just not good for the sole and the stitching here. So as long as you're not using these shoes as brakes, you're going to be fine, and I'm going to explain what you should do if you have a kid who likes to be on wheeled vehicles. So really the major con is just that the durability of these shoes when subjected to really heavy abuse is not so good, and you will be out $70 if you don't have a sewing awl and know how to stitch through leather and a rubber sole. It's not that hard, but if you don't have the right tool, it's basically impossible. I want to take 1 second to say thank you to Ben and Tina for your PayPal donations. If you want to support this channel too, use the thanks button or the PayPal link you'll find in the description box. And hey, don't forget, you can click the join button down below to become a supporting member. Now let's get back to these minimalist shoes for kids. These are the Splay Explorers, and on their website today, these are selling for $44 for the pair. Thank goodness it's not for each one. At only $44 a pair, it's not surprising to learn that these are not made in the United States. These are made in Mexico. Pros on the Splay Explorers include this very handy dandy Velcro strap and this wide open upper construction, which allows my son to get in and out of this shoe super duper easy. Just like the Rambler, these shoes are super duper flexible. The sole is thick enough that I'm not worried about my son stepping on anything sharp like a rock or even a piece of glass, but it is still thin enough that the sole is super duper flexible, so he can still feel the ground and maneuver with his little tiny toddler foot muscles. Just so you have a comparison, you can see just how flexible these are versus the Ramblers, which are also pretty flexible, but not quite as flexible, but definitely more dirty. Because the Rambler sole is just a little bit thicker, it doesn't bend quite as well, and it also doesn't have these geometric sectioning pieces that the Splay has, so it's just not quite as flexible, but it's still quite flexible. The Splays, like the Ramblers, are also zero drop, meaning there's no heel on the back of these minimalist shoes, so my son's calves are going to still be normal length and functional. But the other big thing that I really like about the Splays is that it has this little loop here on the back of the shoe. This loop might seem like, well, who cares? Like, is your son really using that to pull his shoe on? No, he jams his finger in there, or I jam my finger in there to help him pull the shoe on. But this little loop is fantastic when you are going out somewhere like the beach, which we live near, and my son wants to take the shoe off, and he, of course, is not going to just hold his shoes while we're wandering around the beach. No, he wants me to hold his shoes, but I don't want to hold his shoes and just like walk around like this the whole time. No, what I want to do is take a carabiner, run it through these two little loops, and then just attach to my backpack. This is how you dad. The toe box on these shoes is also nice and wide, so my son's feet do not get crushed and scrunched in that toe box. His feet get to have full normal function. His toes can move, his feet can move. It's wonderful. In terms of cons, the only ones I can offer are kind of speculative. I noticed that my son strongly preferred his Ramblers, and I can't really know why, because at the time we were trying to figure that out, he didn't have enough verbal language skills to really explain. From what I can visually see from the outside, it seems like the Ramblers just have a little more volume, and just from the feel of the leather, it seems like they're probably more comfortable. My son likes to run around without wearing socks a lot, so just slipping on a leather shoe is probably a lot more comfortable, just has a lot better feel on the skin than slipping a barefoot into a canvas shoe. I have some leather soft star shoes as well, and I know slipping into those without socks feels really nice. On the other hand, I would never go without a sock into a canvas shoe like the Splays because it just isn't that comfortable. I've also noticed that for me personally, wearing the Splay shoes tends to rub, this canvas material tends to rub across the top of my toes, and it gets really uncomfortable really fast. So I don't think that's been happening with my son's shoes. He's never complained, and I've never noticed anything on his toes, but that canvas material certainly is not going to be as comfortable as the leather. Now you may be wondering whether these shoes can be used as brakes when your child is riding a bike or using a plasma car, and to that I can say they are better because the rubber sole actually, it wraps all the way around here. It's not stitched, so there's no naked stitching on the bottom here, so that won't wear out. But the sole is thinner than the Ramblers, so the sole will probably wear through quicker if they are used as brakes constantly. But here's the thing, the sole is also stickier, so I don't think they make great brakes. I don't think my son tried to use these so often as brakes because I think they would just be too like And also, after he destroyed these shoes so many times, I didn't want to let him use these shoes or these shoes anymore as his braking mechanism. Which finally is going to bring us to these croc-like looking things that are really questionably minimalist. These shoes are Capelli, New York, a brand I have never heard of, and we found these at Marshall's. You can buy these for $10 a pair at Marshall's, which means these have nothing to do with New York, they're made in China. These are not marketed as minimalist shoes, and I don't think they would even qualify necessarily as minimalist shoes because they do have a bit of a heel drop. It's not big, but the heel is a little bit more built up than the front of the foot. But I still think these are a reasonable shoe choice for my kid because the toe box is still nice and wide and roomy. The sole isn't super thick, even though it does have a little bit of a drop. And because it's not super thick and because of this weird whatever material it is, it's able to bend pretty well. It's pretty flexible. It can still mold and still allow my son to use his toes and feet reasonably well. In addition, he can slip these on and off really easily on his own, and this little strap back here is really handy for clipping to my backpack when we're at the beach. But the biggest pro of all here is how durable these shoes are. These are actually an unused pair of his that we bought to prepare for when he's big enough to wear these. We've already gone through another pair of these in a smaller size that we've thrown away, unfortunately, before filming this video, and they were absolutely trashed and thrashed for about a year and a half, and they survived a year and a half of just total annihilating, horrible breaking,
thrashing, running, breaking, thrashing, running.
I wish I had taken pictures or video of those shoes before I threw them away, but they had a hole worn right here, similar to where you would find the wear down on the Ramblers here. And this material had just gotten worn away. The tread was all worn, totally bald. They were just the baldest tires you'd ever seen, and they just took it. So anytime he wanted to go out for a ride on his Strider bike, or he was gonna play with his plasma car in the backyard, I tried to get him into these kinds of shoes so he could just rip them to shreds. And ultimately, the cost and the durability under that kind of abuse is the biggest pro of these types of shoes. If you have a kid who's going to be destroying these types of shoes, it's not a good idea to have them wearing these all the time and having to replace them all the time, unless you don't mind spending $50 to $70 every time you need to buy a new pair of shoes. When I was growing up, my parents would only take me to get shoes at places like Kmart and Payless, and shoes then were like $10, $20. So with inflation, maybe $40 is the same as $20 back then. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. Overall, the biggest drawback of this type of shoe is that it's not truly minimalist. The heel is a little bit taller than the forefoot, so that's not great. And also, who knows what kind of factory conditions these were made in. So to summarize this review of minimalist shoe options for kids, we've got the Softstar Ramblers for $70 that work really well, are really comfortable, made of leather, made in the United States, and they are super comfortable, they feel good, they're super flexible, they have a good amount of protection, but also still quite flexible. Kids can take them off and put them on reasonably easily. That is awesome. The Splays are $44. They have a Velcro strap, but they open up really, really wide, so they are also easy for kids to put on. They're a canvas material, so wearing them without socks is probably not as comfortable as these, but they do have this nice little hook that is super handy for hooking them to your bag so you don't have to carry your kid's stinky shoe in your hand. The sole is nice and flexible and twisty and bendy and thin and allows your child's foot to move really well. These Capelli New York Crocs knockoffs can be bought for really, really cheap. They will stand up to terrible thrashings and all kinds of abuse for long periods of time, but they are not truly minimalist. They do have a wide toe box, but the heel is built up more than the forefoot, and who knows what kind of toxic material and toxic working conditions these were made in. Ultimately, this is the collection of shoes that we have landed on for my son. They seem to work well for specific use cases. These two work really well generally for everything except for acting as brakes, in which case we want to have these handy. If you want to get a pair of the Softstars or the Splays for your kids, I'm going to drop some affiliate links down in the description box and you can use those to help support this channel. Another way you can support this channel is to use the thanks button down below or the PayPal link you'll find in the description box. Or become a supporting member by clicking the join button down below. I promise I will not use your money to buy myself a pair of shoes like these. For more videos on minimalist style shoes, check these out. Like, share, and subscribe with the bell notifications on. And as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't.